This episode is sponsored by W Wellness. You know that moment when you realise you're not operating at 100%, tired all the time, and just feeling like your body feels out of sync? This was me. I just kept thinking, I need to sort this out. But every supplement aisle or article I read just felt too overwhelming, and I really didn't know where to start. Then I found W Wellness. They're the UK's first expert-led wellness platform. I spoke one-on-one with a brilliant nutritionist who helped me figure out exactly what my body needed. They tailored a plan that made sense just for me. Now I'm starting a 12-week journey, and I'll be sharing with you the changes I notice along the way. If you're ready to start your own wellness journey or just need help knowing where to begin, visit w-wellness.co.uk. Hi, welcome back. I'm Helen, therapist, author, and your host of the I Don't Think We Talk Enough About podcast, where each week I'm joined by wonderful guests to talk about the things I just don't think we talk enough about. And today I'm diving into the subject of attachment and attachment styles, a subject that's become increasingly popular and sometimes misunderstood, especially in the age of social media. Our earliest relationships shape, without doubt, the way we connect, love, protect ourselves, and even see who we are. But with so much content floating around online, it's easy to reduce attachment styles to bite-sized labels that we get hooked on: anxious, avoidant, disorganized, without understanding the deeper roots or the possibility for healing and change. So today we're going beyond Instagram, beyond the tic-tac. So today we're going beyond the Instagram slides and TikTok summaries, and I'm joined by clinical psychologist Dr. M to explore how attachment styles actually form, how they impact our adult relationships, and really importantly, our sense of self, and also how we can learn to shift these patterns over time. Dr. M, welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. What a treat.
It's honestly so beautiful to meet you, having followed you for so long on Instagram and connected that way. It's just so gorgeous to have you here in real life, so thank you.
And likewise, it's lovely to meet you. I remember when I first joined Instagram that your account was one of the first local accounts I followed, and I was so excited to see another qualified mental health professional taking over the space that unfortunately can be dominated by accounts spreading misinformation. And it was such a relief to me to know that there are qualified people interested in populating the squares with some lovely, helpful informational tidbits to facilitate healing. So thank you very much for having me.
That's lovely. Thank you for saying that. And as you were saying that, I was thinking, gosh, you're so right, because people can click on their social media apps and believe everything they're reading, can't they? They really can. So we have to be really careful of that and really mindful, don't we, every time we post?
Absolutely.
What are people taking away from our words?
Exactly. And it's so hard to catch the nuance. And I think people are sometimes, especially in relation to attachment and attachment theory, keen to categorize themselves and produce a narrative within themselves because of the way that they relate to this attachment theory. And possibly unknowingly use this as a way to block change, or to say, I am this way because of my attachment or because of my childhood. Yeah. And when you do post the nuance, even you can think through it 1,000 different ways of what people might say back to this, or have I looked at my content X, Y, or Z way to make sure it's clear enough, and it never is. So the nuance behind every post as we talk about concepts in psychology, concepts in attachment, of healing, how we love, where we struggle, how our attachment shows up in relationships, how our childhood shows up in the workplace. It's heavy stuff. It's highly nuanced. It's incredibly personal. And sometimes it comes across wrong in social media. So I'm glad we're having this conversation.
I love the way you said that. And it is so heavily nuanced because humans are, and everyone's experience is so different. But also, you mentioned the word heavy. And sometimes, and it is, and as a therapist, I know just how heavy that attachment work can be. And as you say, the child showing up at work, or the child in us, the attachment showing up in the workplace or in our relationships, it's heavy. And again, I really picked up on what you said around when social media implies this very structured labeling. People are quick to label other people, oh, they're avoidant, they can't change, or they're this, or I'm this, I can't change. We fall into that real fixed mindset, don't we? Whereas we know, you're a psychologist, I'm a therapist, it's not like that. It's so much more fluid, so much more nuanced. I'm so glad you said all of that. So I'd love to dive in. You talked about childhood there. The people coming to listen are really interested in understanding themselves, trying to get more information. So how would you start to describe or help someone understand where attachment first starts, what the styles are? Just give us a little bit more depth to attachment theory.
And it's a fascinating topic. Attachment theory started here in London, actually. John Bowlby, as psychology tried to be more scientific in its study of human behavior. And this is coming out of a time when families are very traditional. And it was assumed that the mother's job was to raise the children. A lot of this is coming in post-war time as well. So you can imagine post-war London surviving bombings, tragedies of war, and there is a lot of pressure then on females to hold the family together. And John Bowlby was particularly interested in early relationships, and they focused in this early relationships on mothers and children. There was no other way to relate to a child. It was the mom's job back then. So he conceptualized attachment as being vital for healthy development, in that the mother, they also use this horrid term mother replacement, which I don't like, but we can call it now caregiver, primary caregiver, is they're looking for security within the relationship. So are needs being met? Are they being attended to? Are they being is the mother figure paying attention to the child? Meeting their needs, responding to their cues, and responding appropriately to their emotional cues. This work was accelerated by Ainsworth and the stranger situation, which is where we see research trying to understand human behavior and to develop a scientific study of human behavior. And this was the strange situation where children and their mothers were placed in like a friendly laboratory setting, and they were left to play a little bit, and the child was, left to explore, not with the caregiver. And then at different intervals, a stranger entered the room, and then mom left the room, and the children's behavior was observed. And the result of this experiment, even though it was a very small sample size, were the original attachment styles. We know them today as securely attached. And then there's 3 insecure styles of attachment. And from a clinical perspective and working with therapy, I like to look at insecure as a group altogether rather than their specific categories. But that gets broken down further into avoidant, anxious, and disorganized disorganized is dynamic, as you know, is that it's not one style in and of itself, but it is an insecure attachment that wavers between anxious and avoidant. And it's tricky to spot at first, but you will see components of both categories appear in working with those. And so even when I post on these attachment styles, I make a point of saying that this particular style of attachment was conceptualized specifically in the mother-child dyad, where these develop kind of first 18 months, 2 years of life. So these are very primal attachments, deeply connected with physiology, the physiological experience of being safe or being unsafe. And later on, research has added to this as it deals with physiological arousal, how we perceive threat, how we respond to perceived threats in our environment, our baseline anxiety, our baseline resilience to stressors. So it is a huge component of human relationships because this is the essentially the creation of a footprint of how to experience other human beings.
Thank you for explaining that. Thank you. And it's really important to hold on to the fact that it's developed so young, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's so, and you say about the footprint, that blueprint of how we relate to others. Do you want to talk a little bit more for the listeners about how those insecure, let's look at insecure, because then obviously we would know the secure would be very different to that. So looking at that insecure attachment, how does that manifest in, I know it's very broad, we're looking very broadly here, but how would that manifest as that child grows and starts to attach to, as adults, to other adults? How does that impact that?
It is, it shows up everywhere. I think it was Esther Perel that said, from the bedroom to the boardroom, your attachment. I mean, she didn't say attachment style, but she is referring to how you feel around other people. Do they comfort you? Are they trustworthy? A lot of these fundamental assumptions about who we are, who are other people, and how we relate to them are all formed in a very nonverbal stage early on in childhood. And while I think it's tempting to say that, if I had an insecure attachment with my mother, therefore I will have this attachment style throughout life, we have to be careful in making that jump. Although the foundation is there and that relational pathway is there, attachment is really important to focus on between the two people, because we can find security in someone where we wouldn't have it at home. And I've worked with, and I'm sure you've worked with, hundreds of people that they do the healing work to have a secure attachment within their relationship, and they will never establish that with their parents. So while that trajectory might be there, and that might be some of the underlying assumptions of, will people meet our needs? Going back to the idea of attachment. So if it was the mom's or the parental caregiver, their job is to attend to the needs, not just the physical needs, not just, making sure they have their water bottles topped up and school snacks, but are they attending to the emotional needs? And where our vulnerabilities come with an insecure attachment is there's a foundational belief that my needs are not worthy of being met by other people. And if you have a belief like that, with ample evidence throughout life of, I've expressed a need and it wasn't met, there's anxiety around asking for needs in relationships. And that might show up as asking for, status. Like, where are we? What are we as a couple? Or when you did this to me, I felt that. Are you going to talk about it? Are you not? Are you going to avoid it? Or are you going to create a narrative in your mind about what happened so that you don't have to talk about what happened, as we see with a more kind of anxious or preoccupied state, is that there is a desire for attachment. There is a strong desire to be close to others, but also a great physiological discomfort in being close, because it wasn't a space where your needs were securely, consistently, predictably met. And so in romantic relationships, there's feelings, there's discussions, there's the future, there's not to mention children, and then you exacerbate underlying issues tenfold. But it's how we see ourselves in relation to another. And similarly with avoidant, I can think of children where their needs were not met, not because there was ill will from the parents, but sometimes they're occupied, they are engaged, they are, working too hard, or there's children with other needs that take the space. They're working at capacity. They're battling things that make it difficult for them to fully attend to their child. And in those instances, the children express the need, but it kind of falls on deaf ears. And they learn to stop asking and really disconnect from what they need as a person, tend to develop this relationship with other people, like, I don't really need you, I'm self-sufficient, I feel unsafe in intimate situations talking about feelings, because there's no experience with that. There's no emotional development of somebody even discussing what's underneath the surface. And so there's just, sometimes it's lack of experience, or sometimes it was met with, judgment or criticism or shame, where the person learns to then ignore their needs, deprioritize themselves, attend to where they are praised, focus on what they have control over, and kind of power through life, keeping people at an arm's length, avoiding intimacy, avoiding connection, not believing that relationships are additive or helpful or necessary, but kind of like, true love is a joke, dismissing connections as fantasy or fairy tale, not needed. So it shows up in so many different ways, and it's there and it's palpable, and you can put a finger on it in most clients, as I'm sure you're well aware, that it's such an easy thing to push behind us and to say, you know what, if you didn't remember X, Y, and Z, it didn't happen, and it's therefore not significant for you now.
But it's so significant, isn't it? And we see it in our work, don't we? And it's been a wonderful theory to be able to understand, hasn't it? To understand how we show up with others. And it enables, when people understand it in themselves and in others, to have immense compassion for that younger part that learned that way. And I don't know about you, but what I see more and more actually in my work is this deep longing and searching and void that doesn't ever feel complete or settled or landing for someone, as they're battling to understand. Because if that blueprint, as you say and as theorists say, is shaped so early on, people who may come to therapy in their 20s, 30s, 40s, much older I'm seeing as well, they've had, well, all of them, all of their life, just knowing that. And I'm seeing a lot more of that at the moment, in this longing, searching, and when they discover or learn and things fit, a real grief of what they didn't get in that secure attachment, a real longing for that. And in that, I love the way you said about you can be one way in a relationship with one person, but you would never want that from your original caregiver because it doesn't feel safe. And obviously they had their own work, and I'm not talking about immense trauma from those times. I'm talking about general attachment. You can't go back and search for it there because it won't be there, will it? So do you sort of, you get that kind of real longing?
It's sort of like this grief for what wasn't.
Yes.
That emotionally safe, gooey, protected, unconditionally loved self. Because at the end of it all, you can overcomplicate parenting, you can overcomplicate human relationships. But at the end of the day, everybody wants to be loved, accepted, and they want to feel safe. And we think about how many relationships where we don't feel emotionally safe and why that is. And we have to go back to these original blueprints, these original templates for, is it safe for me to express a need to this person? And it is a blind leap of faith. Every person, every relationship dyad is a risk in being rejected, a risk in being shamed. And again, it's not rejection or criticism for an outfit. It's rejection and criticism for the most delicate, vulnerable. I use the word gooey and I can't think of another word for it, but I'm sure.
I know. I'm like, that's in there, isn't it?
Where you can just safely fall apart emotionally in the presence of another human being, and to have that space not just validated but contained. And that is a true secure relationship where there is trust, but the trust again is not just because it's there, because it's constantly being rebuilt. And I think another misconception about a secure relationship is that it's just secure because it is, not really valuing the amount of work and checking in and negotiation and discussion of needs. I think it's really easy if you don't have a secure relationship to say, well, I just don't have it, because there is a heck of amount of legwork that goes into creating and maintaining a secure relationship. And a lot of anxiety also within that of, now are they going to meet my needs, or am I going to be the one compromising? Am I the one compromising again? And this all has airspace within the relationship safely where these concerns are expressed. It's not that they're not felt, and it's not that they're not felt without anxiety, or it's not that hard conversations are avoided or endured with anxiety. There will be some things that even a secure couple will avoid talking about, or things that are just too emotive at that time. But there is a heck of amount of work that goes into maintaining a secure relationship. And I think it's really important that we give that the airtime it deserves, because it seems like, I didn't have a secure relationship growing up, so whoops, guess here I am.
Yeah, I absolutely love you mentioning that, because I think people don't realise that even secure relationships take work.
Absolutely.
They really do, and they still touch on vulnerable points in a relationship. And you're right, so often people assume that if I'm in a secure relationship, it will be easy. Both parties have to, I always like the triangle approach when I'd work with my couples around person A, person B, having their own needs and their own lives and independence, and then C being the relationship. And what are both A and B doing for the relationship too? And seeing the relationship as a third space.
Absolutely.
And that can really help. And both A and B need to be feeding into that. Mm-hmm. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about how difficult it can be for two insecure people to be together in relationship. And that's so challenging, isn't it? Because it can bring up lots from childhood. It can bring up rejection, abandonment, anxiety, and not having the safe space to turn to within that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing in that situation, and what kind of advice would you be giving to people in that kind of environment?
Absolutely. I mean,
it's a big question.
It's a big question. It is. It's an important question because of the way relationships feel. And oftentimes, I'm sure this will resonate with you as you see somebody that might have a more anxious predisposition pairing with someone that has a more avoidant predisposition, which I think of all of them is probably the most common combination that I tend to see, because it's exciting for both of them at first. You know, you have I'm speaking in incredibly generic terms. I want to make sure that, and as somebody with an avoidant attachment might still have very anxious tendencies, and there's far more overlap in these two than the Instagram squares. Well, now rectangles will allow.
Rectangles now.
Rectangles now.
Actually, mine are still squares, which is really annoying.
Mine went to rectangles.
Mine haven't swapped over yet.
I don't know why. I see yours as rectangles. Fascinating.
I still see everyone's as squares.
So let's say it's somebody who, when I think of like a anxious attachment, I think about somebody who is incredibly preoccupied with the relationship and someone's happiness within the relationship, someone's satisfaction. It's all very transactional and relationally insecure, and it feels temporary. So they're kind of overanalyzing what's going on in the relationship, creating backstories, filling a lot of time on issues because there isn't that approach system. If you want to reduce humans to biological bases, we have approach and we have avoid. If we don't approach something safely, we avoid it. And if we're trying to avoid it, we'll ignore it, or this kind of preoccupation where we're rerunning, we're overthinking, we're creating false narratives, we're holding on to hopes and dreams and if-then kind of relationships with the other, and it's exhausting. And so typically you'll see a lot of people pleasing, overly attending to the needs of the avoidant partner. And at first this is great, because the avoidant is like, oh, well, finally getting the attention I love and deserve. And even though if I'm not sure I really want that, it's nice to have. Mm-hmm. And the typical avoidant appearance, I would say, is kind of like a duck on the water, where they seem all cool and collected, but physiologically, it's the same level of anxiety going on. Is that approaching that space of asking for your needs or asking for space or asking to have a difficult conversation. It's like, I don't like that. But instead of running stories, they'll just say, you know what, that person's not worth it for me. That conversation isn't important to have. Yeah. And if they valued me, they wouldn't put me in this situation. Therefore, I don't need them. So they end up kind of like sabotaging those bids for connection and bids for closeness because they feel suffocated, micromanaged by the person with a more anxious attachment. So this is what I tend to see between two insecurely attached individuals, is there is a lot of anxiety around the bids for connection, closeness, vulnerability, and it's not really approached enough to dampen the anxiety. And so going back to your question of how do you work with this clinically, is we have to work on the approach and creating safety within the approach. So we're prioritizing emotional safety within this space that is creating enormous amounts of discomfort and anxiety between the two people. And that knee-jerk reaction to escape an uncomfortable situation is, the avoidant will shut down, not be interested, create a story of why this isn't working, why that person isn't working, why it isn't worth their time, why they don't need to be here because they're better off alone and it's easier and it's fine and they can manage just fine without anyone. And this sends the anxious into a tailspin because they're trying to do everything they can to be seen and loved and accepted, and they just want that closeness, even though they're creating a lot of anxiety within the relationship around the closeness. It's almost like they're focusing too much on it. And so valuable work happens in therapy sessions when we just work on disarming, paying attention to those knee-jerk thoughts that then drive behavior. For example, I don't need them, or nothing I do is good enough. And paying attention to what triggers us, if we want to think about a trigger like a spike in physiology or this immediate like knee-jerk reaction to I have to handle this, and the only way I know how to handle this is with this rotten template I was given at 18 months old. Yeah. And it takes so much, as you know, self-compassion to begin to disarm a very raw, primitive. It was nonverbal. It feels intense because there's no verbal memory of attachment. It's all within your gut. And so these are incredibly emotive sessions. And it's important to work with enormous amounts of self-compassion for both sides. And this is another reason why I say that attachment work, you can't do it alone. You can't work on your attachment within a relationship without the other person working at the same time, because otherwise you just end up, and this is again typical with the more anxious styles, like, oh, I'll just lift the load for everyone. I will bear the burden of this. I will fix us single-handedly. And this actually drives away the avoidant even more because they feel pursued and that there isn't a safe space.
If you're in private practice, you know how much care and attention goes into each session you hold. But outside of the therapy room, there's a whole other side of the work: scheduling, documentation, billing, insurance, telehealth, and it can all add up. That's where Simple Practice can really help. It's an all-in-one electronic health record built to support the flow of your practice. Everything's connected: your calendar, client notes, billing, and even secure telehealth, all in one place. The goal isn't just efficiency, it's ease, so you can spend less time juggling tasks and more time being present with your clients and with yourself. Whether you're growing your practice or looking to simplify your systems, Simple Practice offers a sense of calm and clarity in the middle of it all. For new customers, you can get an exclusive promotion by going to simplepractice.com/Helen Marie and get a 7-day free trial, then 70% off for 4 months. Please see show notes for more details. I really love the way you explained that about the couple dynamic, and lots of people asking, we'll move to questions in a minute, around can you move between attachment styles. So we'll leave that for the question bit. But what I loved that you said was it's about the fact that we're in relation with another, that we need, it's both parties. But I think it's also important that one person can do the work to work on themselves, to understand themselves, because as they change, I just think for my listeners, I want them to understand that, that it's not that if you don't both go to couples therapy, that's it, you're doomed. I think there is an element of you can begin to make changes if you change towards the person.
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
No. You were saying it, but I just wanted to clarify that you could do work on understanding your knee-jerk reaction. And your knee-jerk reaction is always going to get the other knee-jerk reaction from the other. If you change your behaviour, you create a safer environment for the other
Absolutely.
to approach you. Everything shifts when we change how we normally respond, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So there's room for, I always say, nothing changes if nothing changes. If you don't explode at something they might have done, say, or you don't retract every time they make you feel vulnerable, if you sit there with more transparency, or I really felt this then, or you completely change the trajectory of a conversation, don't you?
Absolutely. And that's it, especially in couples. There is a dance that happens, and it is a knee-jerk dance. It's a dance, ironically, that everyone does and everyone hates. And they hate that they do it, and they don't know how to do it differently. And so I think, you find that traction with the couple you're working on, with the individual, and you say, okay, you've been doing your own dance, and now we're going to go back and we're going to step on each other's feet as we learned this new kind of dance, because we are going to commit to being emotionally safe for each other. And once you allow that focus on emotional safety and that almost guarantee that we are working towards this together. I want this, you want this, we want this. We want a space where we both feel valued, heard, understood, loved, and accepted. And if we can commit to that and building that together, wow. Because it takes all the suspense of, are my needs going to be met? Are they going to hear me? Are they going to value me? Are they going to kick off and make me feel small? And instead of just taking those experiences of conflict or miscommunication personally or avoiding it altogether, we can reflect that back into the space. X happened and I felt unimportant.
Yeah.
I felt misheard. I felt that you had a different priority. I felt that I was not prioritized in that instance. And when you can air these safely as feelings, and you know that there's a will to work together to create what is a secure relationship, that's when magic happens.
Yeah.
And equally to your point, when you're trying to understand the dance and maybe the partner is not on board or not yet on board, or perhaps there isn't a partner, but there is a series of patterns that keep appearing in relationships, and not necessarily in dating, but in friendships, work relationships. We can look at this pattern single-handedly and say, like, wait a second, now what am I assuming about other people? What am I assuming about myself? What am I assuming is going on here that's triggering me? And then you can start to peel the onion and say, like, you know what, actually, I feel like I can't communicate my needs because I'm assuming that they won't be heard and my needs won't be met. So I realize that I'm part of the problem because I am not putting myself out there for fear of rejection, ridicule, shame, etc. And that's when a lot of self-awareness then shows up. And again, you have to work on an attachment within a relationship. But when you have that aha moment of how you relate to other people, it's empowering.
That was so beautifully said. What's my part in this? And that real deep self-awareness that, I could be contributing to the way this dance carries out. I could be contributing to these patterns. It's so important for everyone to see their part in the relationship dynamic.
Absolutely.
That was wonderful. I've got a few questions from my Instagram community.
Nice.
That I know you haven't seen, but I think they'll be great to answer with your beautiful wisdom on attachment. I thought this was interesting because before we met today, we talked briefly about, it's ever so important with attachment styles to think about the effect on the nervous system as well, and our mental health and well-being. And I thought this was a great question. Is there a link between attachment styles and a tendency to fall into specific survival states?
This is a fantastic question.
Isn't it?
I don't think it is a yes or no answer, but I'm going to say yes, and this is why. When we study the different attachment types and record physiology, so how we measure anxiety or nervous system arousal is through biomarkers. And so we look at, when we look at the physiological biomarkers of arousal, of nervous system activity, insecure attachments tend to have greater nervous system activation. And so we're looking at, for example, to a startle reflex, how quickly does the nervous system escalate and then fall? And what we see is that people with an anxious or preoccupied state tend to have more baseline anxiety. So altogether, they are more not dysregulated, but they have a kind of quick accelerator on. I'm just thinking of like a Ferrari zipping down the streets of London. It's a green light, and there's like the secure attachment Honda that just kind of takes off. And then there's the anxious Ferrari, which is gone in 2 seconds. And that's how I think about the, the quickness to escalate and to accelerate. But equally, it's like the Ferrari has no brakes. So the driver is like dragging his feet out the side of the car to try to get it to slow down. That it's easy to escalate and it's hard to reset. The avoidant, it is more anxious underneath it all, but they'll never show it. Or it's absolutely blocked and blunted, so there isn't a real strong stress response at all. And then disorganized tends to be the most. It's very volatile, very unpredictable. So I think a lot of these attachments, if you look at them as categories and try to project that forward, that you are seeing the foundations of nervous system dysregulation and how the brain develops differently in response to having incredibly high levels of cortisol very early on in life. You can see that in the way the HPA axis then responds to stimulation, pressure, stress, and this, I don't think there's any clear linking study, so I have to be careful with this extrapolation, but yes, essentially the nervous system and how it develops. And if you think about it, like if you're not held when you're upset, you haven't co-regulated with another adult, you would have to self-regulate through that. And you either self-regulate by shutting down or finding ways through that. And I'm forever left with the image of, as media portrays serious mental illness, is that you see, they're sweeping over generalizations of how people behave, but when individuals are rocking themselves and talking to themselves, I think of this as like the most, how do mothers hold their baby? How do parents hold their babies when they're very upset? Is that kind of rocking, that stimulation, that containment? And then when you see incredibly distressed people, in institutions doing the same, it's like they're desperately trying to regulate that nervous system, but they don't know how. And so I see it, again, absolutely showing up in how your nervous system develops.
It's a heartbreaking image, isn't it? And I'm so pleased someone asked that question, because I really wanted in today's episode to talk about the actual effect on the nervous system and bring it back to that, and how disruptive that can be on your mental health as well.
Absolutely. And even going back to those like foundational, why isn't this taught in school? Why aren't we taught about our emotions and how to regulate them?
I know.
Trigonometry loved it, haven't used it since, but emotional regulation is something that I think we could all use a little bit more of.
I think so, and I know we haven't got long, but that's a whole other discussion, isn't it? And if we could all have a way of showing up for the other in that compassionate way that we all
I've got you way.
I've got you, that everyone just wants to be held. And it's so, it's a really deep question. Dr. M, that's been such a beautiful episode, and I could talk to you for hours on this. It's a subject that I'm really fascinated in and guides a lot of my own work. So
absolutely.
I feel like I'm going to invite you back for another episode one day to maybe just to unpack some of the hundreds of questions I got on attachment.
Absolutely.
So
Such a fantastic topic to bring awareness of, because it is something that we can all work on, and creating that emotional space within us as a first step is how do we approach our own emotions and say, you know what, I'm going to be safe through this. Yeah. And once you can do it with yourself, you practice in low stakes situations, and it will open the door for deeper connections in your relationships, deeper connections, more meaningful existence. And so I think it's valuable work, and I thank you for inviting me to talk about it today.
No, honestly, so welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean so much if you could follow the show, leave a quick rating, and maybe even a review to let others know what you think and whether they may enjoy the conversation too. Your support genuinely means so much. Thank you. Enjoy your day.